Please enjoy this audio recording from the Salt Lake Home Builders Association General Membership Meeting, where we held a webinar with Dr. Elliot Eisenberg, sharing with us his insights on the current economy. Thank you, Ace Alec of People's Home Equity, for sponsoring the event.
My name is Elliot Eisenberg. I'm the president of Graphs and Laughs, an economic consultancy, and I'm here to hopefully give you some insights into what's going on into the U.S. economy of late, given our whole new world of coronavirus or COVID-19. Let's begin and let's talk about where we are. And the economy was doing okay before COVID started, right? The household consumption was C is the major term in GDP. It was doing okay. Corporate investment I wasn't happening. Government spending wasn't happening, and net exports X wasn't happening either. It was all household consumption, 70% of GDP. The problem is that 70% has largely gone away. It's gone away because we're all locked up in our homes. The different states have different rules about locking up, and Utah happens to have one of the more lax rules out there. I understand that you guys are just partying every night and staying up late and doing all kinds of crazy debauchery stuff. I'm joking. But about 96% of all counties' population is in some serious form of lockdown, so you can't spend any money as a result. That's the problem. So consumption's really tailing off, and GDP this quarter, as a result, is going to be exceptionally bad. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. The prognosticators are varying anywhere from, say, minus 10% at one end to minus 40 at the other end. I mean, that's incredible. Even minus 10 is terrible, but minus 40 is incomprehensible just about. My prognostication is that on an annualized basis, GDP Q2 that we're in right now will fall by about 28%. More than 25, I think less than 30, but this will be a terrible quarter. Last quarter was already bad enough. Last quarter, we already had a mild negative contraction last quarter, even though Jan and Feb were good, and the first half of March was pretty good. And then the second half of March, all hell broke loose. So we're going to, even that little bit of March, those 2 weeks, bad weeks of March, probably drove us into recession for the whole quarter. Negative 3, 4%, nothing big. But imagine now 6 times as much, or 5 times, or 4 times more. It's going to be much worse. Again, I think minus 25, 26, 27, 28. What's the recovery going to look like is the big question people want to know. Are we going to get this lovely V-shaped recovery that we think we'd like to get? The answer is, of course not. We're not going to get a V-shaped recovery, because a V-shaped recovery requires everything to go perfectly. And in life, as we know, nothing ever goes perfectly. Things go wrong. Congress takes too long to pass the bill. The SBA and the Treasury fight about rules. Implementation is a problem. The money doesn't come to my bank in time. The mail gets caught. I mean, things just simply go wrong. So what I think we're going to have is not the V-shaped recovery so much, but maybe more like a check mark recovery. So it's down and then slowly goes up. That's okay. People talk about a U-shaped recovery, right? Where you've got a long bottom there, a U-shaped recovery. People also talk about the bathtub recovery. That's the bathtub recovery, the long bottom. I don't think so. I think it really is a check mark. Down and then long and slow up. Good, slow up. So don't worry about it. Don't think April is going to be the harbinger of things to come. It's not. It's just the worst quarter in U.S. history. That much I can promise you, no question. And May will probably be in our houses, some of May too. Wuhan, where the thing began, 77 days in their houses. We're now at about, I don't know what day we at now, 45 or 50. So by the end of the month, we'll be at day 45 roughly, from mid-March. So we could go 5 or 10 more days. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest into May as well. As a result, consumer confidence is tanked, right? And household consumption depends so much on consumer sentiment. Sentiment's really weakening substantially. So we're not feeling all that good about the world right now, because we're locked in our houses, and all we can do is buy food on Instacart and I guess Amazon Eats and stuff like that, and Uber Eats. Confidence in Europe is doing really poorly too. They'll do even worse than we do, because at least we're coordinated. We have one central bank and one federal government. They have 27 of each. Well, not quite. They have one central bank, but they have They have to please 27 constituents. It's much more complicated. And as a result, things aren't going right. Their recession may be deeper than ours and may last a little longer than ours as well. If you look at measures of consumer sentiment or consumer spending more appropriately, what do you see? You see movie theater sales, they're down literally, hotels, down about 70%. Revenue per room down 80%. So no one's going to hotels and the prices are way down essentially, right? So you got really big problems in hotel attendance. Not like, I know that you're shocked about this, I know. Airplane travel, it's down about 90%. So you've got some very serious declines in spending, right? Movie tickets, they're down by 90-95%. Movie theaters are all going bankrupt. So you've got this just incredible reduction because we're stuck in our houses. Consumer sentiment is bad. We can't spend any money. A bunch of us have lost jobs, which I'm going to get to momentarily. Airplane travel is down almost 100%, not quite. Restaurant traffic is down 99%. Automobile sales are down. And this is important because automobile sales are kind of like houses. Not exactly, but not wildly dissimilar. It's the biggest thing you buy outside of a house. So if you're optimistic about the future and you're willing to buy a car, you're going to buy a house. If you're optimistic and want to buy a house, you're pretty optimistic you're going to buy, and you're probably, or some people will buy cars. We do roughly 17 million years of cars, and we sell about 1. Total housing production varies, but only about 1.4, 1.5 million, roughly 10 to 1, because roughly cars cost about a tenth as much as a house. A house is 400,000, a car is 40,000. Bulk. What happened to car sales in March? They plummeted by a third. And remember, the first third of March was good. It was the second half of March that was no good. So a lot of sales declined. There's a huge sales decline in March because the second half of March was really bad. Our housing sales can't do well if home sales aren't doing well, if movie theaters aren't doing well, if trains aren't doing well, if planes aren't doing well, right? You're not going to say, oh, everything's awful, I'll buy a house. That's, people want cash when things are really bad. In the short run, certainly, housing is not going to be a certain sectors that are doing pretty well. Marijuana sales are up, booze sales are up, and gun sales are up. Not sure what that tells us about America as a country, but it tells us we're under stress. That's what it's telling us. And we're all in our homes and we don't love it so much right now. The second term in GDP is house consumption, business investments in plant and equipment. It's going nowhere. Business sentiment is crummy because restaurants are closed, stores are closed, people are locked in their houses. There are some winners, but not a lot. So the first term in GDP, C, is not doing well. The second term, I, is not doing well because and the manifestation of it is poor consumer sentiment, right? We know oil prices and natural gas prices are terribly low. So in the Uinta Basin out east, I guess, from Salt Lake City, that's not doing particularly well. Oil drilling is not happening in Colorado and Wyoming. I'm sure there's a little bit of it in Utah too. That's hurting things as well. Global oil demand has fallen an incredible 20%. And global supply is going up because the crazy Russians and the crazy Saudis are fighting over who's going to blink first. And no one's blinking, so they're producing now a little bit more oil. So demand is at a lifetime low, fallen by 20 million barrels. And supply is at a once-in-a-generation increase of 3 or 4 million barrels. Unsustainable increase. We have 25 million barrels too much every day, filling storage tanks, and soon we're going to run out of storage. So the Saudis and the Russians are going to make a deal. But in the meantime, we as Americans are suffering because, gas is cheap, but we can't drive anywhere because we have no car, we have nowhere to go, right? So gas is cheap, doesn't help us. And we're the world's biggest producer of oil, that's hurting. So this is a big deal here right now. So oil prices are collapsing, not helping America. Corporate profits in the second quarter and the rest of the year aren't going to be going anywhere, right? There's been downgrades of corporate bonds. And some of those triple B bonds that are just above investment grade, and this is the corporate bonds, triple B, they fall below investment grade. Suddenly they're going to have a real hard time refinancing themselves because fewer people want the bond yield goes up. It makes it hard. So what we have here is the healthcare crisis. If we're not careful, morphs into a financial crisis, defaults on bonds and on houses and mortgages and rental apartments, rents aren't paid, and that becomes an economic crisis. And what the federal government is trying to do by shoveling an inordinate amount of money in front of us through fiscal and monetary stimulus is try and break it and say, we're not going to go from the healthcare crisis to the financial crisis. And if some of them has gotten to the financial crisis, we're not going to go from the financial crisis to the economic crisis. They're trying to put buffers in between both of these spots, between the finances and the health, between the healthcare and the finance, between the finance and the economic crisis. It's important, right? And we'll talk a lot about what the government's doing. The government's doing a lot of things, but manufacturing, unfortunately, is going back into recession. So you've got a tremendous amount of negative things happening. The fact that the government is stimulating wildly through monetary and fiscal policy is unbelievably important. Unbelievably important. Because what it's telling us is that the worst possible outcomes have been completely avoided. They're just off the table. This is not going to be the Great Depression. We're not going to see 35% unemployment rates. And we'll see big unemployment rates, maybe 20, but they'll be a short duration, and then they'll start to improve again. We can fight about the improvement. Again, we talked about the V, and then we talked about the U, and we talked about the bathtub and the check mark, which I happen to think is the right way to think about it, right? The check mark. But we'll get better. But in the short run, corporate investment in plant and equipment isn't going to go anywhere. Factory utilization rates are falling. Firms aren't investing in plant and equipment. It's not going to happen. But what is happening right now is the federal government's thrown $2.3 trillion at us. And stimulus one was $8 billion. Stimulus package number 2 was $50 billion, and package 2 was $2.2 trillion. And they're now talking about a fourth stimulus package of $300 or $400 billion more for small business because the take-up rate on those SBA loans is incredibly high. So there's help out there. There's the cavalry's coming, and the big stallions are on the way here. But the problem is we don't know how bad COVID will be, and the central bank is doing things. They'll lend pretty much to anybody against anything resembling good collateral. And they opened up a whole bunch of new programs today, and they're offering to lend up to $2 or $2.5 trillion. So between that facility the Fed central bank's got and some other facilities, and the money Congress has sent out, there's something like $6.5 trillion, 4.5 trillion, I don't know, 6.5, closer to $7 trillion of money potentially available in terms of just money from Congress or lending from the central bank. This is making the worst outcomes go away. We're still got problems. The labor markets are weak, but the worst is by far over. The deficit's going to go up, that's for sure, but don't worry about it. It's not the time to worry about it now. You know, during World War II, we had 30% budget deficits. Now it'll be GDP. Now it'll be 15 or 16 or 17. It's fine. Interest rates are low and they're short, and we can withstand it. And it's better to get our people healthy, get the economy healthy, so that when things recover, we have a nice, robust recovery. And if all the firms go bankrupt and everybody loses their house and their apartment and everything's foreclosed upon, we're not going to get the economic revival that we need. The key thing is to take this economic country we've got now, that's an economic coma, and allow it a month or two of just silence. And that's why we've got to prevent the medical crisis from becoming a financial crisis, and the financial crisis from becoming an economic crisis. And that's what the central bank is doing. The government raises the deficit, it raises the deficit. That's totally fine and totally acceptable, right? There's no problem here. There really isn't a problem here. We still have a trade war with China a little bit. And unfortunately, the dollar is really strong compared to other countries, because in times of desperation and when we're all scared of cats, what do? We all jump into US dollars all over the world. Everyone wants dollars. The central bank has supplied dollars, increasing supply, hoping to push down the price a little bit to this overwhelming increase in supply. They want increase in demand. They're going to try and match this increase in demand with more supply. But nonetheless, the dollar is strong. So exports are weak, and corporate investment in plant and equipment is weak, and C is very small because we don't want to spend money. We can't buy our house. But G is riding to the rescue in a whole number of ways, and that's absolutely important, critically important to remember. But the recession began in the middle of March, the week of March 19th. That's when the recession began. That was the week when 3.3 million people lost their job. The following week, 6.8 million people lost their job. Today, they revised that up from 6.6. And today, 6.6 million people lost their job. This total of 17 million people have lost their job in 3 months. Normally, we create 250,000 or 200,000 jobs a month. That's 2.5 million or 2 million jobs a year. We just lost 8 years of job growth in 3 weeks. This is a very serious recession. It's incredibly deep. And April will be the deepest recession quarter we've ever had in history. The depth of this decline compared to the behavior of the last 4 or 5 years economically that we've experienced is 12 standard deviations away from the norm. For those of you who understand economics and statistics, this is an incredible, this is like, if someone asked, what do you think the chance of this happening in January? I would say the chances are 0.00000000001. That's like 12 standard deviations. This is just unparalleled, incomprehensible, totally unexpected, but it'll be blessedly very brief because all the stimulus coming from the central bank and the federal government. This is important. And as a result, this recession is likely to be short, not shallow, but short. This will be a 6-month at most recession, March, April, May, June. And I think by July, we may well be out of it with a little bit of luck, or we stop getting worse, right? And as soon as we stop getting worse, then we're in recovery, right? As long as things are going down, we're in recession. When we bottom out, no longer recession. Then we begin to improve, and now we're in the recovery. So maybe it'll be 5 months, 4 months, but I don't see it's not going to be a 9 or 12-month recession. No, too much fiscal stimulus, and the economy was good before we went into the tank. That's really important to remember. Now, labor markets, they were really tight. Unemployment was excruciatingly low. In Utah, it was profoundly low. You need a magnifying glass to find the unemployed person, just about, right? Not anymore. We've got 17 million people who've lost their job in the last 2 weeks. And this is despite all the government intervention. The government intervention is going to start hitting now. The money will be made available now. So it's taken a couple days, a couple weeks to get this happening. And time is money here, and time is jobs lost. But unemployment benefits have been enhanced. They're not 24 weeks. They're now 36 weeks, which is much longer. And the benefits have gone from whatever they are, state benefits, they're bigger now. They're bigger by $600 a week. If you're unemployed, you're going to get a top off of $2,400 extra on top of what your state gives you. This will allow people to stay in their homes, pay their mortgages, pay their car payments, not have these things repossessed, not have a replay of 2008. That's really important. But the labor market is profoundly weak. Unemployment is already 10%. It will probably hit 17 or 18 before this is done, maybe even 20. Briefly, but it may well happen. This is important to know. Wages aren't going to go anywhere, obviously. And luckily, inflation is remarkably benign. We've had benign inflation now for 10 years, since the last recession ended. There's been no inflation. Our economy, Canada, Mexico, Europe, China, Japan, doesn't really matter where you look. Australia, Taiwan, South Korea, no inflation, nothing. So this fear of all this money causing inflation, worry about something else. If it happens, it'll happen tomorrow. And that's not altogether a bad thing. We'd like to have a little more inflation than we have, but the inflation is not going to be here in the short run. That's very unexpected, right? Rates, they're at zero on the Fed funds, and they're going to stay at zero for the foreseeable future. There's absolutely no expectation they're going to do anything. And the Fed even said, we're here. The Fed is all chips in, all chips in, all chips in. They're going to do whatever it takes to help on lending to anybody pretty much with anything resembling decent collateral, they'll lend against it. They've built all these 8 or 9 different facilities to lend against. They'll lend against even junk bonds, if I'm not mistaken, state and local governments. They'll borrow. You can borrow against bonds, right? I mean, it's just an incredible amount of panoply of things, not to mention all the money Congress is spending, the fiscal policy coming from there. So this is going to insulate us from the worst, but nonetheless, it ain't going to look pretty. Now, let's talk about housing and see where housing is going to go, because a lot of you are into housing. And the news in the short run ain't good. In the long run, it's going to be better, of course, because the housing shortage is still persisting. But this lack of employment, the large number of unemployed people, even if they're getting a top up from the federal government of $2,400 a month on top of their own unemployment insurance of $1,200 or $1,500, that's great, but people don't buy a house when they're employed. As I mentioned earlier, they don't buy a house when they're not looking for a car. They don't buy a house when they can't find, go traveling or movie. You got to be optimistic to buy a house. Buying a house is probably the most optimistic thing people do. The mortgage is, 30 years. You got to feel good about yourself, your prospects, your wife, husband, whatever it is, right? You got to feel good about that. Right now, we're nervous. Expectations are we're not going to have even a population blip in 9 months, because when people are nervous, they don't have kids. So you're not going to have a kid. You're not going to buy a car. You're not going to buy a house, right? just not going to happen. So copper prices, houses are full of copper for electrical purposes. Copper prices are down, partly largely because of China, but China's also, they're not going to invest in stuff either. So copper prices are down. We know that year over year, first-time mortgage applications are down. 2 weeks ago, they were down, if I'm not mistaken, about 11%. 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, they were down year over year, 24%. This week, this is last week, it was 11%, then 24%, and now 33%. That was last week. So this week's data won't come for another couple of days. Next week, we'll get it. Maybe we're down 40%. Existing home sales are down 40%. And car sales, as of the end of March, are down 33%. It's almost inconceivable to see a boom market in new home construction. It cannot be. It cannot be. It can't be. So be careful. I want you to focus your energies on holding your balance sheet together. I want you to focus on learning how to sell homes electronically. I want you to up your game in technology. So when the recovery comes, you can make everybody happy in every conceivable way. It's really important to keep this in mind. If you put first-time mortgage apps into perspective, the decline of 33% brings mortgage applications back to where they were 10 years ago. It's a long ways back. I mean, we're actually, if you go back and think of it differently, when was the first time mortgage apps reached the level that they are now? The answer is the late 1990s. So there's just, people are nervous. And this is a really important thing to keep in mind. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is that prices are unlikely to really fall. The last recession, they collapsed. But the last recession was largely centered in the housing market. You know, it was the housing bust or the housing crash is one of the words they used to describe the last Great Recession. This time, housing is just collateral damage like everything else. And will commercial real estate prices fall a little bit? Sure, I think office space will fall more because no one has to go to the office. We can all work from home now. That may change. But the housing shortage remains. These people will get their jobs because when the recovery begins, be it a V-shaped, unlikely U-shaped, bathtub-shaped, or checkmark-shaped, when things get starting to go good, we're going to create 600,000 jobs a month. We can create 5 or 6 million jobs a year. We could do this for 3 or 4 years and have a pretty robust recovery for a number of years, have above average growth, because we had all those extra people who were unemployed for 2 or 3 years, and we could do this. Maybe have 700,000 for 3 years, I don't know, but we'll have very robust growth. And then housing activity will start again. So I would think that housing activity will probably start to really take off 9 months from now, 12 months from now, when we see the shape of the recovery, we see whether COVID-19 has come back in a boomerang effect. If we have a protocol to help people who are sick, if we have injections that we can give people who are not sick and inoculate them so that COVID essentially goes away and becomes nothing more than a mild flu like everything else, then people will be much happier. But until that happens, and until we're out of our house, and until the economy's kind of going, and until unemployment's much lower. And the other thing to keep in mind that's important is who's an entry-level buyer. Entry-level buyers are youngsters, generally youngsters, not always. And they're working in retail, they're working hospitality and leisure, they're working in transportation, they're working in some manufacturing. These sectors aren't doing good. And in terms of the rich, high-income people, they're going to be nervous that their stock market holdings have come down, right? Stock market's down, I don't know, 30% now from its all-time peak, down from 50%, which is a big difference. And we're feeling happier about it. But this isn't, we're not all buzzed and happy right now. So this is the time to, I think, take stock of what's going on, acknowledge that existing sales are well down, automobile sales are well down, and new construction. Now, new construction that's going on right now is going to finish. You can't finish to have a house and then let it sit. So there may be a lot of business completing what's in the pipeline right now. But we may come to a point in the not too distant future where those homes are built and there's nothing else in the pipeline because there's not a lot of sales are going to take place in June and July and August. That's when we're going to re-get our bearings. The bleeding ends, and we begin to set ourselves up for a nice August, September, October, November, December. That's the key aim that I really want to see happen out there. There's a lot of concern out there. I get it. The key things to keep in mind are the government really has our back. If you think back to what happened in 2008, the government didn't realize how serious that decline was. And that decline is small compared to what we're experiencing. And the government really didn't get involved actively with TARP and ARRA and all those things, and all kinds of bailout packages until late 8, when Lehman Brothers went under, after Fannie and Freddie were national. This time, within a couple of weeks, all these packages have come through, and they're now working on a 4th package. And yes, the Democrats and the Republicans are fighting about the contents of the package, but the political will to do it is there. The voters want it. The voters need it. We need more stimulus. We need more bailout money to keep us alive during this period of economic coma, so that we can come out of it in reasonably decent shape. That's the key. That really is the key that's out there. And I want you to keep in mind that April is going to be bad. End of March and April are going to be horrible, horrible months. And Q2 will be the worst quarter in U.S. history. But we will get out because the federal government and all the stuff that they're doing, and our human nature will take this money and we'll go forward with it, right? In Salt Lake, we're a hot real estate market with a housing shortage. We've been able to maintain building at a slower pace. What will our housing market look like coming out of this pandemic? I think it slows down before it gets better. I think you finish what you've got. You have a lull period. I know there's better population growth and all that sort of stuff, but everyone's going to get hit by this. More, maybe a little bit less so in Salt Lake and Provo, Orem, and Logan, and so on. But we're all going to get hit. Even the least hit places are going to get hit almost as much as the average place. The way to think about this is how much of your economy is based on leisure and hospitality, how much is transportation, how much is mining and utilities, right? Those are important. Those are the things that are getting particularly hit. But even a place like San Francisco, that number is, say, 13%. The median, say, 16. And of course, in Las Vegas and in New Jersey, where they have, Atlantic City, those places will get hit much more. But there's not going to be a lot of difference. There are some rural states, I think, like Wyoming, that may get hit a little bit less. Tourism is more important there, but social distancing is much easier. But you will recover. There's no question that the housing shortage persists, right? That's really the important thing to keep in mind. Another question, what are the lasting effects we'll see in the workforce from social distancing? I think the major consequences, people are going to want to work from home. And that will affect a whole lot of other things. I think the clothing we wear to work will differ. We've all gotten accustomed to wearing, pajamas all day long. So that's going to affect our outcome too. So we're going to dress differently. And we're going to tell our boss, look, I worked at home for 6 weeks during COVID. Why can't I work there now? I want to work at least 3 days a week. That may affect office buildings. It will change commuting patterns a little bit, or it depends how much. If you all work from home, commuting patterns will change a lot. So this will affect office real estate spaces and stuff like that. I don't know the answers to these questions, but there are certainly ones that I'm thinking about a lot, right? Here, will the pandemic move critical needs manufacturing to America? I think the answer is yes. I don't think as much as we think, but supply chains are going to be very different now than they were in the past. In the past, it was always literally just the economics of the thing. Well, if we can shave off a couple of cents off it by moving it to China, then we'll do it. Now the point is going to be, I don't think so. I think the better thing to do is have it nearby, Canada, Mexico, conceivably. But we want our critical components where there's no redundancy to be nearby. If we have redundancy, we can put it abroad. But if there's no redundancy, we're going to have to keep it here. I think that will bring back some activity. But again, if wage rates are a 10th or a 20th what they are here in Vietnam or something, it's very hard to compete there. So I think it'll be critical components and ones that there's no other supplier for. It'll be the ones that come back most quickly, right? The pandemic is considered a black swan that is almost incomprehensible event that alters how we transact business. Do you see our stay-at-home orders moving us to digital workforce, or what other changes may occur? Yes, Absolutely. We just talked about that. This comment that you can't work from home because you don't work and it doesn't work well. That argument is shot. So what's an employer going to do? Say you can't work at home, and other people are going to say yes because it really does work. There's a problem here, though. Everybody in the office knows everybody because you've worked together for years until now. If you bring on new people, as you will necessarily, they won't have that benefit. So you're going to have some days where you still work in the office, or take turns, or have hot desking, or something along those lines, right? Are there some small businesses that may not come back? Sure. I think retail, sticks and bricks retail establishments are going to have a hard time. Some restaurants aren't going to come back, that's for sure. These are companies that were poorly capitalized to begin with, or in retail, poorly capitalized in some cases, and with a business model that's just generally not working so well. And those are businesses at one level, you want to help the employees there so they get a job, but maybe not the business, because the business isn't really fundamentally a good business for the 20th century post-corona, right? The 21st century, sorry, post-corona. So yeah, absolutely some business. I think a lot of business will come back. Some will take their place that are very similar. So it's a Shea Elliot versus Shea Jaren will open up a new restaurant. But there'll be a smaller restaurant. It'll be something else there. I don't know what will happen exactly. Commuting patterns will change. Working patterns will change. Storefronts will become different, right? Will supply chains move to the U.S.? A little bit of supply chain movement to the U.S. Many have moved their purchasing to online sales. Will they ever go back to the local stores? That's a great question. I think somewhat not. I mean, look at how we've all taken up enjoying having people deliver food to our house. You know, this Instacart is suddenly really popular. People like me, up until now, were really hesitant about having someone buy our food. I like to buy food. I don't like to buy food quite so much now. I'm taking life in my hands doing it. I do a little bit, but not much. And once you've broken down those barriers and people do what they do and they've changed their behavior, it's hard to go back to the way it was. I mean, you see real estate agents are now, what are they doing? They're giving they're giving virtual tours. So you log in at 3 o'clock and a robot goes around with a camera and shows you the apartment or the condo or the ranch house, or the backyard or something. And you can do all your closing documents online and sign things electronically. So I don't think we put the genie back in the bottle. I think this does result in some absolutely fundamental changes to our economy, right? State and local governments will realize budget shortfalls. What will likely be done to make up for the lost revenue? That's a great question. And I think what's going to go on there is the federal government's going to bail out the state governments. The state governments are under a world of hurt, right? Their revenues are going to go down. Their sales tax revenues are going to go down. Their income tax revenues are going to go down. But their healthcare costs and social costs have just gone way up. So it's higher expenses, lower revenues. They're in a world of hurt, and states can't run budget deficits. They're not allowed. So the federal government's going to have to help them. And this next phase 4 bill, if you will, is going to help, I think, small business and help more state and local governments. And the central bank's going to lend against them to help to lend against state governments as well. So help is coming. Realization of this is they're fully aware of this problem. I don't think we knew quite how severe the decline in revenue would be and the increased costs were going to be. But there's no question that state and local governments are going to get aided. Municipal governments, county governments, city governments, villages and towns as well, right? What will this pandemic, any other questions here? Lasting effects, the workforce, we talked about that. Black swan. I think we've really largely covered our bases here. I want you to be careful. Don't get this V-shaped recovery that we had was predicated on too much optimism. It was unfounded and it was too much. That's why we have to have the slope of the recovery is going to be more shallow than the slope of the decline. It's just the way it is. Things take longer, things go wrong. Reconstituting a business is more complicated. You can close a business down by turning out the lights, walking out. The business is closed. The business doesn't instantly reopen when you open the door and turn on the lights. You gotta bring back workers, gotta make relationships with suppliers and vendors. Some of the vendors have gone out of business. You've got to find new vendors. None of this is necessarily hard, but it takes time. And that time is why the slope is not going to be V-shaped, but something less. It'll still be fine. And we may lull around at the bottom a little longer than we want with this, this U shape turning into a check mark. It'll be okay. The government's protecting us. I hope I've answered a bunch of your questions. I hope I've given you some insights as to what's going on economically. Again, my website's econ70.com. You can sign up for my blog there. I want to thank the Home Builders Association, the Salt Lake Home Builders Association, for inviting me. And I also very much want to thank People's Home Equity for sponsoring me. I hope I've given you some thoughts. I look forward to seeing you again, either this way, in some non-real way, in some virtual way, or in real life in the not too distant future when our economy is enjoying a good, solid, strong recovery. Hopefully no later than somewhere in the middle of the third quarter. So if April's awful, middle of May is bad, then May and June we're sort of recovering in July, and then we start to take off again. So remember, it's not that far off. But I want you to look at how car sales are doing and how existing home sales are doing. That will give you some good indication of what's going on economically with new starts, right? Thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure being invited onto your lab.